Joining us now to share her memories of John Paul II is Sister Helena Burns, a daughter of St. Paul. Good morning, Sister.
Good morning.
Now, I understand that you were pretty much an anti-papist when you were a teenager. Is that right?
That's right. And I hate to give away my age, but I am old. And, of course, we're called the John Paul II generation because basically through our growing up years, he was the only pope we knew.
Yeah.
And then he accompanied us through our whole adult lives, And I'm from Boston originally, so there I was in Boston in 1979. He was elected in 78, of course, the year of three popes. That's how you remember 1978. It was the year of three popes.
Yes.
Paul VI, John Paul I, and John Paul II. So it was 1979, and I'll just put it this way. Some radical people got a hold of me and were filling my head with things that you like to fill your head with as a teenager. Rebellion. No one's going to tell me what to do. And what I was hearing about this papal visit to Boston, which was one of the very first places he did go to after being elected to the papacy, and, we'll tell him to go back to Rome, and who does he think he is, the old white celibate male thing, And I was like, yeah, that's right. So my brother managed to get some tickets or something he's a year older than me, and he was a very good young Catholic man. I wasn't a very good young Catholic girl. And he's like, come on, Helena, let's go. I said, I don't want to go. I don't want to see this pope. And he was very upset with me. And in the end, he didn't go because he really had no one else to go with at that point. And so we didn't go see the pope.
Oh, man.
Yes, isn't that terrible? I regret it to this day.
Wow. Did he ever forgive you?
He did. And he was also instrumental in me coming to love this pope because what happened was when the pope touched down at Logan Airport in Boston, my family was all gathered around the TV. It was just Mom and Dad and me and my brother. And I was up in my room. And my brother, who normally didn't interfere with my life, we didn't interfere with each other's lives or try to tell each other what to do, he screams up the stairs, Helena, get down here. You're Catholic. The Pope is coming. Okay, I'm about, maybe 16 years old, something like that. And I'm thinking, whoa, this really means a lot to him. And to please him, I was like, well, fine, I'll come down and look at your Pope. So I came down the stairs and stood there with my arms folded, watching over my parents' shoulders. And this Pope comes off the plane, kneels down, and kisses the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it. I got what he was doing. It was like, this is my land, my country, my city. And I had never seen any other foreign traveling dignitaries do anything of the like, the humility. And then he got back up again. And I was like, okay, nice lead off. Okay. 1 point for John Paul II. And so I kind of hung around watching here and there during the day. We just left the TV on. And then at night, he was on the Boston Common at one point, and it was pouring rain, and it was muddy, and it was cold, and all he was doing was preaching the gospel and giving people communion. And I remember thinking, now why do we hate this guy again?
Mm-hmm.
And I was transfixed by that beautiful Polish face. And I just started, and my parents left the TV, my brother left. They didn't watch it anymore. They watched maybe an hour or two that day. Of course, he was here in the States for about a whole week, traveling all around. I was glued. I could not stop watching TV. I would come running home from school, flick on the tube, and just sit there watching this man move around my country. And, of course, he did all those cool things, like he went out to Iowa just because he got invited by a farmer. He put that onto his itinerary,
Mm-hmm.
So he really won me over. And actually, even before that, when he was first elected Pope, I worked in our town library, and our religion section wasn't that great. And we had a lot of kind of anti-religion books, not books that expressed what a religion was about, but things against religion, things always arguing against God and against religion in our town library. And I remember we had about 10 copies of Hans Kung's Infallible, ? That big,
yes.
thick book. And all of a sudden, this other little book appears right next to it, this little tiny slim volume called Easter Vigil and Other Poems by Karol Wojtyła. And I'm looking at this little book going, oh, so he's a poet, huh? And I love poetry. I mean, I love poetry. And I was astounded that a pope could also be a poet. So I said, oh, I bet it's some religious, pious fluff, So I picked it up, and it was what I love, this free verse type thing, and very, very dense, deep stuff that you really have to think about, kind of short poems. And I had to kind of admit, they're not bad.
They're not bad.
They say they've lost a lot in translation from the Polish, but I like them. So little by little, he was gaining my attention. He was gaining my allegiance. I had to have my own personal conversion to Christ. But I remember thinking, he came to see me, and I didn't go to see him. I almost felt like he would have known whether I was there or not. And I know a lot of people have that feeling about John Paul II, that personal connection. When you see him, he looks right into your eyes. You feel like he does know whether you're there or not. So I do have that regret of him not having seen me in the crowd.
Yeah, certainly an understandable regret, but I would say that you've probably made up for that since then in how much you've studied the Holy Father. And tell us a little bit about your shared love for philosophy.
I've always loved philosophy growing up, even though I didn't have formal studies in high school, for example. But I'm from Boston, and we're just a very philosophical people there. We speak philosophically, we think philosophically. And when the Pope's Fides et Ratio came out, it's still my favorite encyclical of his. The translation from Latin is Faith and Reason. And he actually addressed this encyclical to the whole world, to philosophers in particular, but really the whole world, and not just Catholic philosophers. And he's basically telling the world, don't give up on reason, because that's kind of what postmodernism is tempted to do. It's tempted to go right into nihilism. I can't find a meaning. I can't find an answer. There's no truth out there anyway to find, a kind of despair. And he's saying, no, no, no. And his famous quote that the two wings with which we fly to God are faith and reason. So I always love the fact that he understood the secular mind, because I grew up rather secular, and he could speak to the secular mind as a philosopher, because that's our common language. The fact that he was a philosopher meant he knew how to reach out to the modern world. He could flip over and become the theologian, the pope, the pastor, but he also knew how to speak to the secular mind. And I really appreciated that, because I feel that that's what we have to do as the church. We have to dialogue and communicate with the whole world. And he did that so beautifully in that document, Fides et Ratio. I recommend people to read it all the time. It's not a hard read. The first half especially is very easy. Then he kind of launches into some specifics about philosophy. But the fact that the Pope is a philosopher, among so many other things, he was a playwright, he was an actor, he was an athlete, he was a mountaineer, he loved young people, he was so many different things, and he was a rock star. I mean, he changed the papacy forever. There he was, using the media so well, being so visible, proclaiming his message with such joy. Actually, there's a new book coming out by his head of his communications with Joaquin Navarro Valles. He's writing a book on his experiences with the Pope. And I remember what he said. He said the Pope was a profoundly cheerful person. He said he didn't just put a smile on so that people could see a smiling Pope. He said he lived out of this deep joy. He was a profoundly cheerful person. And the fact that John Paul II never misspoke in the whole long papacy, he knew that there was no such thing as off the record anymore when you're Pope. So he never gave out his personal opinions on things or negative comments because that's how he felt about something. He just knew how to say things, and somehow his message got through. Somehow the media didn't twist his message. You can always tell how the media think about someone by the photos they choose to print and the statements they choose to print from that person. And I think there was a tacit approval of John Paul II, even though they did not agree with his policies or necessarily the tenets of the Catholic faith, which John Paul II proclaimed fearlessly. But I think they loved the man, even though they didn't necessarily agree with him. And so the pictures were flattering. They chose flattering pictures of him and chose to simply print what he said, simply repeat what he said, whether they agreed with it or not, which is a kind of a sign of a tipping of the hat to the person that you portray that way in the media.
Well, I think about one of the quotes that I've heard from him is that, when he was a young priest, how he fell in love with human love. And he had like this really personal aspect to him that you could just see, like you said, his eyes. You could see it in his eyes. And I wanted to talk a little bit about his love of human love, because I know that I first met you at the Theology of the Body Congress, and so I know that TOB has had a pretty profound effect on you. So I'm wondering if you could touch briefly on how the Holy Father's teaching there touched you.
Well, you're absolutely right. Theology of the Body has changed my life and transformed my religious life as well. And I'm convinced it's going to not only transform marriages, but also the priesthood and religious life, because it's all connected. We're all very much connected in Theology of the Body. And John Paul II addresses the celibate life in Theology of the Body as well. Well, I was very privileged because at 19, I was assigned to our proofreading department at our publishing house. And, of course, the Daughters of St. Paul printed the Theology of the Body, the big text, the first edition, which actually came out in 4 small texts. And there I was in the proofreading department, and we were printing everything John Paul II dreamt, sneezed, coughed, thought about. And we in different formats, and we had collections of his talks on the family and pro-life and his journeys and everything. And then this thing called the Theology of the Body came out, and I was sitting there in the proofreading department reading this very heavy-duty stuff, and a lot of it went over my head. But remember, I love philosophy, so I could follow his train of thought, and I got the gist of it. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, there is so much more to the body, to human love, to sexuality. It is so deep, it is so profound, and so connected to God. It's right from the heart of God. It's not some biological thing on the side, part of human life, you know. It's deeply spiritual. So I remember thinking, wow. And again, just more and more respect from me for the Pope, because not just in Theology of the Body, but in so many other areas, he answered my questions at the deepest level. Nobody even came close. Nobody but John. It was like he was reading my mind. Nobody came close to answering my deepest questions than John Paul II. So I feel like he's my personal mentor. And I have asked God that when I die, John Paul II is going to come meet me and take me over to the other side. And when I've talked to other people, they said, I've asked God the same thing too. When the Pope died, that's the first thing that popped into their heads. Oh, he's going to greet me now when I get over there.
That's beautiful, because, you know, I can't even imagine a more loving person to invite someone into the gates of heaven. These are beautiful memories. Sister Helena Burns, where can we find you online?
My blog is hellburns, HELLBURNS.blogspot.com.